Yeah, it's on now. We're going to start in about a minute here. So what we're going to do tonight, we have a little point of a little business we have to do first after we get our meeting started, because May is technically our annual meeting where we have to elect the president, vice president, secretary, and treasurer. And so it's going to go really quick. And so we'll get that done first, and then we will continue on with our presenter for tonight, okay? So Kirsten is going to run the election because I'm actually running for vice president, so I can't technically do it. So anyway, my name is Stephen Harper, and this is Kirsten. Okay?
Okay, thanks for bearing with us. So for those of you in attendance, I'm going to go through the nominations, but I will accept nominations from the floor. If anyone has any nominations from the floor, you can accept those now. For our folks who are viewing from online, there's going to be a link to a Google form that you can actually vote for these slated nominees, who I'll go through. But I'm just going to give a moment. Does anyone have any nominations from the floor? Or you can chat in to Drew if you have nominations.
Mention the slate first.
Okay, so the slate of officers, we have for President, Jamie Hewson, Vice President, Stephen Harper, Treasurer, Sue Parrott, and Secretary, Deborah Kay. And then I'm just going to ask for nominations from the floor one more time, or make sure there's none coming in through the chat. And then I'm going to go ahead and say that we could elect the entire slate of candidates. So I just need a showing of hands if you are in favor of the nominated slate. And any opposed? Okay, and then any oppositions? No? Okay, Drew say no.
We need to count.
Okay, oh, I need to count.
Because we have
Okay, so all in favor, please raise your hands. Okay, I count 16.
Count yourself.
Oh, I can vote as well?
Okay.
Okay. So I think we need 25. So let's see. How many do we have online, Drew?
You may not be able to hear you.
Oh, okay.
Months.
Well, I guess, let's see.
Just a second. How many do we have online?
I don't have anybody on here.
There's nobody on right now?
Well, no, there are people on, but I don't have anybody counting for elections.
Nobody voting?
Nobody, not in the chat.
Oh, I have to
There's
look
an
at
online
the
poll.
spreadsheet. Okay.
Okay, just a second. Kirsten's got to do something here.
Bear with me, sorry, y'all. Hybrid world. Okay, I can access the voting forms.
I've got two who put in the chat that they voted yes online.
There's a couple people in the chat.
Who voted yes online.
Okay.
Derek Urbanski, Cynthia Klein, and Kim B.
I can go to the balcony if you want to count me.
I'm going to count one more time. So if you can all raise your hands in favor, I just want to make sure I've done this accurately. Okay, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, and 5, and that would be 26.
Well done.
Thing, hybrid.
Well done.
Wow, I didn't realize.
Well, that's a little strange, but anyway. Yeah, our bylaws, we have to have 25 people voting. which makes it a little difficult these days, in this format especially. Okay, anyway, so before we get started with our speaker tonight, I want to make some announcements. There's only one announcement actually I want to make, other than saying that this is our last meeting, official meeting until next September. And this summer, right now we don't have any field trips set up for this summer. That may change, but you should look online under events and field trips to see if there are field trips scheduled. There's one more field trip scheduled for this month. One more field trip scheduled, and that is next Saturday, and that's at Larrabee State Park. And you need to register online for that field trip. It's limited to 12 people. I don't know if it's full now at this point, but go to North Cascades Audubon Society website under events, and it's listed, and you can register for the field trip there. And so that is next Saturday. Now, we have one other event that's happening, and that is going to be our annual Peruvian Lake Campout, which is Thursday, I don't know what June, it's a week from this Thursday, let's put it that way. Or a week from this Thursday to Sunday, and you don't have to be there for the whole thing, but we have the group camp at Peruvian Lake reserved, and again, you need to register for that. And so if you go again to the North Cascades Audubon Society website and go to the events, you'll see a big write-up about our annual campout. And if you're interested in it, actually I'm the contact person, so you either email me or give me a call, because I'm keeping track of who's coming and who's not, and whether we have enough space. So if you're interested, check that out. So that's all the events we have going on. And hopefully, you know, I don't know what you're doing this summer, but if we don't see you, then I hope you have a great summer and we see you next fall. And I hope we have much more of an opportunity to meet in person, that things are even better at that point. But again, we've set it up now, so you can also join us by simulcast. Thanks to the Watkin Museum and our partner. And so it's great that we have this partnership, and I encourage you to support them any way you can as well. And I just want to make one more announcement, and that is any of the materials on the back table are available for donation. So you can take a look at, I think there's still some nesting boxes back there, some other guides that may pique your interest. Okay, so tonight I invited Dr. Ursula Valdez, and she is a professor at UW-Bothell, and I think you're from Peru, correct? And she is sort of an expert in the Peruvian Amazonian area, and she has a lot of interest in that area, in protecting the area, in providing education about the area and conservation. And so she's going to give us some insight into the work that she's been doing tonight on the ecological research, conservation, and in the southeast Peruvian Amazon. And so I want to welcome Ursula here tonight. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you very much, Stephen, for inviting me. Thanks everybody for being here today. I'm really happy to be doing this and sharing a little bit about what we do in the Peruvian Amazon. So I work here, and I'm so happy that now I'm kind of like an expert, aiming to be an expert in rainforest, period. Right? I'm very lucky to be in a region with rainforests also. So what I'm going to tell you is a little bit of the story of the kind of work that we do in Southeast Peru. So I'm Peruvian, and I was very lucky to be able to go back to Peru and do my research there for all of my degrees. And that's something that you know, I have a lot of opportunities to do here, but I always need to go back to Peru and continue the work over there. So you'll hear a little bit about the kind of the mixture of doing research and also integrating the work with community-based conservation and also with working with people and young people over in Peru. All right, so let me take you, if this can work. It was working before. We tested. Oh. So let me take you to Peru, and I'm going to show you where we're going to go today. So this is southeast Peru, and you can see as part of the Amazonian basin. So a lot of people sometimes think that the Amazonian is just Brazil. You can see like many more countries draining into the Amazon River that starts somewhere here, and it runs through all the way to the Atlantic. But there's so many more countries that are draining into it. So where we're going to go is going to be here in southeast Peru, near Puerto Maldonado, one of the main cities in the southeast part of the country. And if you can see, Peru has a large proportion of Amazonian rainforest. And fortunately, it's still one of the last in the whole area, like a much larger extension of rainforest that it has been untouched. But that's one of the problems, is that that's starting to change. And that's one of the reasons that all of this has motivated the work. So in this area of southeast Peru, we have a multiple kind of habitats that it goes from primary forest that is being undisturbed, large extensions of primary forest that we're still lucky to have. There's some kind, very characteristic of the area, the terra firme forest, which involves like some terraces, like a little upland forest. And then we also have the floodplain, which is this is highly the result of the dynamics of the rivers, which are very, very critical for the formation of many of the habitats here. We have a lot of successional forests, obviously, as a result of disturbances, like natural disturbances, and also as a result of human disturbances too. And some of the characteristics of some of the particular kind of habitats, we have a lot of bamboo thickets. A lot of people identified bamboo just in Asia. Actually, we have a lot of different species of bamboo in South America, and in particular in this part of the Amazon. And actually, those bamboo habitats are really rich environments for many species of birds that are bamboo specialists, and many other mammals and insects too. Also, another characteristic of these areas is this fantastic association of palm swamps. So if you have heard maybe about Mauritia, or I don't remember what the common name in other places is, but aguaje in Peru, they grow in flooded areas with a lot of like borders of, and especially in the borders of oxbow lakes, which is again the result of meandering. This is low elevation forest, and the meandering of the rivers creates this habitats with like little small and large lakes, and then the surroundings of that would be this particular kind of palm, and creates again amazing opportunities for various specialists, for very unique species, and many of them are specialists to this too. All right, so have seen a little bit of the Peruvian Amazon. If you can see some of these maps that they show patterns of diversity and species richness in particular. So we know that Amazonian rainforests per se are highly diverse with high numbers of species, and if you look at the patterns, there's a little concentration of those specific, or at least high diverse areas. Like if you think about mammals, birds, amphibians, and many other species. This is a very similar pattern for the red colors are showing high levels of species richness. Also for insect, Lepidoptera in particular, is very diverse in those areas. The highest numbers occur in southeast Peru. So really important areas for biodiversity, and with plenty of spaces and niches to fill in there. Let's see what comes. So finally we tested, we did everything, and now that's it. So, another thing is that obviously the area is also very attractive for biologists and for people who are interested in wildlife, and also very important for the for habitat for really important species. Some of them are iconic and very charismatic. You can see the largest rodent of the world, the capybaras, here in this picture. Giant river otters that especially inhabit the lakes, the Salzburg lakes that are in the area. Here's an Amazonian tapir, and here a couple of jaguars like basking in the river in the morning. So all those pictures actually are taken by us and doing like trips to this region. And not all are in the Tamaulipas region, but in general, the Madre de Dios. Okay, let's talk about birds, and then probably you're going to be like very attracted to this. So if you have heard about hoatzins, those are like really fantastic birds, very unique and with a lot of characteristics that make you think about, you know, past times, millions and millions of years ago. They're poor flyers. They feed mostly on leaves, so they're pretty much the real cowbirds of the bird world. And they live around the oxbow lakes. I can keep talking about birds, but I could spend the entire night and have a lot of things to talk about. You could always ask me questions. Carp eagles, that's one of the regions in which we still have forests that it's suitable for populations of harp eagles. And there's many other places in Brazil and Central America that still have, but this is another of the regions. This is one of my favorite species of owls, spectacled owl. Also very, actually common both in primary and secondary habitats. And just some of the favorites, and we'll talk a little bit more about band-tailed manakins, really fantastic species with very interesting social interactions, and also very interesting in their sexual selection. Or natural history associated to sexual selection. This is one of the very important, or at least very attractive species of herons. I don't know if you have heard about the agami heron. It's really colorful, not easy to find, but it's actually kind of common in some of the lakes in this area. And really interesting species. So anyway, just some of the iconic species that in the region, and many more. There's like actually, in Peru, there's almost 2,000 different species of birds. It's second after Colombia. We always are kind of like fighting for trying to find one more species. And Brazil comes after us. And the region has also like a large number of species. So pretty much almost as all this, it's like about 500 species on the region. So pretty interesting. Let's see if this works better. No. Still need to do something. I did this already. This should work. Okay, great. So, I mean, I'm showing you all these fantastic images, like, you know, wonderful rainforests and all. But one of the things that is actually really sad is that this is a region with all this richness and at the same time with many problems when it comes to conservation. The loss of habitat, the forest, you know, large continuous areas, and actually in all the Amazon has been like a very important human impact that is actually affecting large extensions in the whole basin. So in Brazil, there's a lot of things that have been lost, unfortunately. And most of those things are associated to agriculture, and we're going to see a little more of that. But if you can see, Brazil here is the country that has lost the highest amount of forests, followed by Bolivia, and then comes Peru. And that's something, it's a trend that continues and continues. And especially with a lot of migration of humans or people into the forest, and also because of a lot of activities that are associated to demands of resources somewhere else, not only in Peru, but also many parts of the world. So agriculture in particular, when you think about soy, sugarcane, corn that is being cultivated in the Amazon, especially in Brazil, and moving that pattern towards Peru and other countries. Palm oil, something that's becoming very popular. So all those things are taking habitat and taking a lot of opportunities for, including native communities of humans. So not only wildlife is affected, but many people who have ancestrally live in these places. So one of the things is that Madre de Dios in the past several decades has been suffering a very interesting pattern. And these pictures are from a good friend from school, actually, from when I was living in Lima, Walter Wust, which is a photographer and also a forester. And he took these pictures from an airplane, and you can see this is what normally areas within the same region look in Peru, in Madre de Dios, which is the area in Peru that I'm showing. This is a meander of the river, this is forest, that yes, it's succession, but it's natural succession. And then this is what something like this gets transformed into this like a moonscape. And it's all to remove sediments to harvest gold. So gold actually is being produced, or at least is coming from the Andes Mountains. That's another of the really interesting things about Peru, is that the mountain, the east side of the mountains runs drains into the Amazon basin. And all the rivers that are coming from the glaciers and all the water that is running from the mountains comes into the Amazon basin and is carrying a lot of sediments, lots of minerals, and one of them is gold. But gold and powder, that is not easy to recover like nuggets necessarily. So one of the things that people do is they recover those sediments, and to recover those sediments they use some of the things that have been accumulated along the paths of the river. But also think about hundreds and thousands of years of sediments being carried into this habitat, so they cut the forest, and then they get the soil. That's not all, it actually gets worse. So the sediment is so fine that it cannot be easily extracted, so then they need to harvest it with something. And guess what? They use mercury to trap, so mercury binds with gold, and then they trap it with that, and then they burn it. And then the remains of whatever they don't use goes back to the water. So it's a really interesting cycle that it goes really with negative impacts for habitat transformation. You see how dramatic this picture is, right? And then think about mercury going, different compounds of mercury obviously going into the atmosphere that then people can breathe, and not only people, but all the wildlife in there. They've been doing studies in which they extract, they take samples of hair of people that they're not necessarily in the gold mining areas, but they have the highest amount of mercury in their hair. And then obviously then it goes back to the water and pollutes the water. You all know the impacts of being poisoned with mercury, and affects a lot of neurological development. So really, not necessarily in the person that is affected directly, but in the next generations, which actually that's something that is starting to show both in wildlife and in humans. Not only that, so all those problems, there's a lot of human exploitation associated to that. And obviously, from all the operations in the past, the government will give concession for gold mining extraction. And now what happens is that those operations are pretty much, I think it's 80% of them are illegal. So they're not even within like a regular process. And obviously all this land and all these activities has a lot to do with problems with conservation. And human exploitation, both in labor and also in a lot of like young girls who are taken into the Amazon to like provide sexual services. And it's a really, complex problem that it has so many dimensions. So social, economic, it's an incredible economic activity. And then it has a lot of consequences associated to environmental, social, economic problems. All right. So obviously you can think about if the rivers move and the sediments are also removed, then that is affecting the natural dynamic of the river. So thanks to this activity, unfortunately, the rivers are changing, the dynamic of the forest is changing, the ecosystems are being affected, and that it's kind of a chain of reaction when it comes to ecosystems and species. All right, so I know I'm already probably depressing you tonight. You didn't think that you were going to be listening about all this. But the thing is that not only that, so now think about it, what's happening in the world. We are living like significant changes when it comes to natural forces and when it comes to climate. So there's a lot of predictions that are showing that by 2050, most of the rainforest is going to be a savanna. The moisture is decreasing. There's a lot of climate conditions that are changing in the area. So temperatures are a big deal. And also, another thing that is happening is that the rainforest per se, the precipitation pattern in the rainforest is changing. It's becoming drier. And it's kind of like a positive feedback. The drier that it gets, the less, water for plants and so on. Less possibilities even to get more water to the mountains, back to the mountains. So that's a really interesting pattern of changes. And there's no more water-poor plants. If there is decrease in the water-poor plants, there is a decrease in the primary productivity that is going to be feeding the entire trophic chain. So really problematic. And the other problem is fires. A lot of the Amazon is being burned for agriculture. And then the intensification of these fires are also not only because more people are expanding to these areas and more activities in these areas, but also because the temperatures are getting hotter. So kind of similar to what is happening here, right? We get higher, like the temperatures are getting hotter, and then the frequency and the intensity of the fires is also increasing. So very kind of, the same idea in this. Just as a sample, this is a picture 2019 in the entire Amazon of the number of fires that happened only in the month of August. It is shocking to see this. And this is not showing, this is just location, it's not showing the intensity and the extension of each of these fires. So it is a really difficult and very urgent situation, what's happening over there. All right, so again, we're depressed, but we need to do something, right? When we come at the discussions, and a lot of conservationists are talking about, what do we do? It's pretty easy to come up with the ideas. We need to decrease deforestation. We need to do something to diminish the impacts of climate change. We need to kind of figure out how to get people not coming to these places. So all this makes sense, right? If you think about consumption habits, how many of us are buying, things that come from the rainforest and we don't even know. Like even if, you're thinking you're doing something good by being a vegetarian, for example, but if you consume a lot of soy that comes from the Amazonian rainforest or from the forest in Argentina, then you're part of the problem. If you're buying a lot of not only jewelry with gold, but if you're buying a lot of electronics and changing all the time and all this stuff, again, you're part of the chain. So there's a lot of things that make sense to stop, but it's not as easy. So one of the things is that we need to think about what works at a small level and what it works at a larger level. But unless, I want to kind of maybe get a sense of, if you raise your hand, if you heard about gold mining issues in the Peruvian Amazon before. Okay, so I don't know how many people you counted for your election, but more or less we have 5 people in this auditorium, right? So it's not a common topic. You probably heard a little bit more about issues of deforestation in Brazil, or maybe a little bit about the soy and the corn for fuel, but we don't know much about so many of these issues. And we know even less about the situations that many people living in those places are dealing with. Some of those gold miners who we tend to blame for the situation, actually they don't have any other options. They live their entire life in there, and they're actually doing this because they need to feed their families, and their kids are trying to make a life in there. So we have to think about solutions that maybe they're little smaller things that people do at the local level, and then start expanding that in a much global context. It's not easy at all. So we think about that, we all know education is key. The more that we know, the more probability or possibilities we're going to have to kind of work towards a better future for everyone, right? So one of the things that happens is while I was working in my PhD, that was the first time I went to this region. And I started talking with kids, talking with people, and there's, at that time, this was 2004 or 5, there was a lot of, Madre de Dios is considered the biodiversity capital of Peru. But at that time, there was the people in the town were not that connected with the forest. Their parents maybe, and some other people in the native communities around, but a lot of people in town, they didn't have the opportunity to go to the forest because of even the lack of a boat or the lack of transportation. They were in the city. And yes, there were opportunities for tourists to come, but most of the tourist trips will go to one location, deep in the forest, and they barely will have any impact on the people of the community. So one of the things that we thought with some colleagues and some friends of mine is that we start connecting with young people in town, and we start connecting with possibilities to learn a little bit about the needs for education and also how to provide opportunities for more education with them. So we joined a group of students, but at that time within their early 20s, and they were going to college with very little hopes of what they were going to do in that town. Many of them will leave the town, or they will study something and ended up doing a completely different activity, even sometimes going into gold mining. So we started with a small group of people, and we decided to first start looking at, so what at that time, what were the alternatives for possibilities of what else to do as a sustainable activity. So you probably have heard about Brazil nut, which I always change to Peru nut because there's a large extension of Peru nuts actually grows naturally in the Amazonian forest. So this is one of the species that has been, especially in the past decades, has been managed sustainably, and has given the opportunity to maintain the forest without eliminating a lot of them, and also not only that, but also maintaining forests for the use of wildlife and then for a longer use by humans. And then that has given the opportunity for small cooperatives to work on that. Ecotourism has been a very big activity. As long as early on there were only just a few companies who were doing that, but then now there's many more, and that's actually very interesting and positive growth on that. So the region offers a lot of opportunities for doing this. But at that time, 2004, 2005, there were just a few large companies that were not even owned by locals, were from either people from Lima, the capital, or people that is even from other places, which nothing wrong with that, but it was a very reduced number of that. So my colleagues and I, we were doing research on birds, and we started very interested. We were working at that time in much more pristine areas, with less impacts by human activities. So we became very interested in trying to see what was happening with bird communities in the areas where we have more humans, and trying to assess what was happening with the bird communities over time. But with the idea to provide opportunities for young people to train with us, and at the same time starting to educate even younger audiences for that. So we started integrating this, and eventually it developed into a much larger project that became the Tambopata Center for Research, Conservation and Science, or el Centro de Educación, Ciencia y Conservación Tambopata. And Tambopata is a river that drains directly into the Madre de Dios River, which is this main river for the region. So we founded that with the idea to first trying to do an assessment of even just finding diversity in these areas, with different types of forests, with different levels of disturbance, and then using all those activities in the process to train students, and then started to build a long-term monitoring program. So over the time, what we've been doing is collecting information in different kind of habitats. We ban birds. We do, surveys of the different species that are in the area. And actually, we have put a little more emphasis on the much more modified habitats rather than in the pristine habitats where there's a little bit more of information where a lot of ecologists focus on those areas. And we follow just the standard methods. If you've done any of the Institute for Bird Populations, this is the standard method to monitor banding and doing surveys and collecting information about natural history and age and sex and body condition and all. And we've done that through trapping the birds. Then we also, we have done transect and auditory surveys, actually collecting information in the rainforest. You probably think that it's going to be, you find birds left and right. Yes, you do, but you only hear them. It's not as easy as seeing them all the time. So then you have to do other kind of records, and also obviously opportunistic records. So we have looked at a little bit of patches of primary forest, agroforestry plots, especially one of the things that is associated to our project, and we'll show you a little bit. We'll look at agroforestry plots in which forest is mixed and multi-crop and natural habitat, and then also other kinds of secondary habitats. So to do that, one of the things that I also want to mention is that we incorporated different groups of people, so local students who participate in the monitoring, but at the same time also universities or courses who are very interested, or even any person who wants to come and help us in the monitoring process. And you'll hear a little more of that. So this, just for curiosity, this is, anybody recognize this little bird here? That gets in one. It's a Pygmy Kingfisher, yeah, and this is actually in March, where we have them using a small little ponds that are in the middle of the forest. So they're not by the rivers, they're not by the lakes, but just like little temporary ponds that are in there. So, so far, just with so there's about 720 species registered for Madre de Dios in the region, and that's just the entire region. And in our place, which is a small reserve, we have had about 255 species of birds. We actually had both species that sometimes we get surprised getting pristine forest species that we find them in secondary habitats, which is a little bit kind of an interesting thing. 85% of those species are resident, about 15% migratory species, and we get like a few things that could probably come all the way here, which is really interesting. So the higher percentage of captures come from wood creepers, which is a very diverse and abundant group in the rainforests of the Amazon. Antbirds, really a special group of birds that they don't eat ants, but they actually are associated to ant swarms, and they can follow them if they're obligated or sometimes even facultative, and they will follow the ants, especially army ants, that they actually are hunters, and everything that the army ants is scared, antbirds will catch it. So it's really interesting. A lot of tyrants and flycatchers, and this mannequin that is in here, there's other species, but this is one of the most common that we found in there. This is the band-tailed mannequin, and I'll tell you a little bit more about it. By the way, how much time I have?
You're fine.
Okay, good. And again, most of this the registration of birds, we've done it mostly during auditory misnets and auditory and visual surveys. And one thing that we get a lot during our auditory and visual surveys are parrots, which are very loud, obviously several species of parrots, tanagers and antbirds. So one of the skills that is really good to know, as you are all enthusiasts of birds, it's really good to know your birds by ear. And that's just one of the things that it really helps in the Amazon a lot. Anybody will recognize the tiny little bird that is in here?
Is it Rufus?
It's a Rufus.
Hummingbird?
No, it's not Rufus hummingbird, but it's yeah, it's a hermit. It's a tiny little, it's the smallest bird that you could have in the Amazon. There is a big hummingbird that is in Central America, but this is a little bit bigger than that. So it's a tiny little Rufus Kermit. Real cute. I mean, it's tiny. Look at that. And it's less than 4 grams. So tiny. And that's something that commonly we found in our plots for evaluation. So I'm going to share, I'm not going to give you data, kind of boring data, but now I'm going to show a little bit of few species that are common to find there and share a little bit about their natural history because it's really interesting. So this is the band-tailed manakin, and what we're seeing is actually a male. Males achieve this plumage at around when they're 4 years old. And before, when they're born, they are pretty much olive color, which is the same, very similar to the color of the females. For this species are frugivores, and we find them now actually in secondary vegetation, natural and secondary human disturbed habitat, and they're actually near water and kind of dense vegetation. One of the really interesting things about these manakins is that have a really interesting reproductive strategies. So the males associate in legs. I don't know if you heard about legs. Actually, we have here some of the grouses in eastern Washington. When they go to a place and you see all the males kind of like doing the stamping and inflating their air sacs and making funny noises and movements to attract the ladies. These guys do a kind of a similar thing. They congregate, males congregate in an area in the forest, and they will do jumps and flips and things and little calls to attract the females, and the females will go pretty much go and check it out, the guys, and see who they like. One of the things that scientists have found, we haven't done any genetics on this yet, but some scientists in Ecuador and have found that there's a high bias for males. So some males pretty much are the most favorite males, and those are the ones who are going to be mating with a lot of females. And there are certain characteristics that the ladies found irresistible in a few of these males, and those males are going to get the majority of the matings. And that, not to say that there are some males who sneak up here and there and finding the opportunity, but they found like only a few males that are the dominant were going to be getting the females. It is really cool how they associate in this particular places like forest with a certain characteristic, with a little bit, the type of branches that they're going to be using, and some lianas, and those habitats are very, very particular, and that's what they're going to be picking. And in our area, we have found 2 of those, and it's reliable. You can go there and see them doing all their mating. What we have found in terms of, once we trap the birds, we can also look at the reproductive status. So we look at brood patches. Are you familiar with them? Right there. Birds, when they are, many birds, and then that's another cool thing about this, is that these males do a lot for attracting the female, okay? Once they mate, it's like, bye-bye. They never see her again. They never put, at least so far, and there's no evidence that they put any effort on parental care. So they just disappear, and the female is left with the babies, the incubation and parental care to do by herself, right? So the females that we have found June to July months where we find evidence of brood patch. So birds to incubate, and actually when you think about the best way to transfer heat is when there is direct physical contact by conduction, right? So they lose a little bit of the feathers that are in this part of the abdomen and from the breast down, and that's the skin gets highly vascularized, and from that, the heat that is generated in there is much more efficient and transferred directly to the egg. So there's a whole process, and this is something actually that we train people on, to recognize at what state of the incubation, or just lay eggs, or just finishing, or in the middle of the incubation and then finishing. And you can see all of that in this skin patch that is being exposed. So the females, in this case, females that we see, they give us all that information. And obviously a lot of other birds, in some species, both male and female, they do the incubation. In this particular case, it's only the female. And again, the female that's looking nothing like this, it's just olive color. Those are the ones who are nesting and taking care of the nest. And probably I'm kind of forgetting something else, but I'm gonna move to the next species. This is another very common, the Amazonian mudmud, very similar to something that if you've been in Costa Rica or Panama, we have another species very similar to that. This is mostly found in, actually it's commonly found in both kind of forests, but primary and secondary forests that it has a little more of, open vegetation. They eat everything. They eat arthropods, lizards, frogs, so they actually can eat a lot of things. And we have been, they're very common, and we can actually recognize them easily by the calls that they do, especially they do early in the morning and late in the day. They make like poop, 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 poop. It's just very easy to recognize the sound. And in Peru, they call them relojeros, or watchmen, because the tail kind of flicks like this on their perch, so it's like a clock, pretty much, right? And the sexual dimorphism is not very obvious. And again, we're being found in brood patches in late March. One of the things that we're trying to figure out, and I'll show you that's something that we want to also collaborate with more people who now are doing more studies of birds, is that, you know how in North America we can see patterns of breeding or growth or molt or anything, that they match pretty well the seasonality that we see in temperate zones. In the tropics, seasonality is not as marked, or at least it used not to be, right? So what we're trying to see is that if there are specific months where birds are going to be, what we can see, and especially in this area, is that we see dry versus wet season, right? So we want to see if there is any particular pattern. And in many species, actually, we've seen it, that they not really have a pattern. They just do it all along the year. So that's an interesting thing about the natural history of them, too. So this is one of my favorite species, the musician wren, and it actually makes a very melodic sound. I wish I would have put one of the sounds, and this is not a picture of us, but it's the same species. And so this is a wren, and they actually have smaller territories, and it's very predictable to find them. They're insectivores, and they're mostly a little bit secretive and mostly found by the sound. They make really beautiful sounds. They have small territories, and one thing that is really interesting, and is still some people trying to figure out what's going on, is that they nest on trees that have ant associations. So there are many species of plants that they associate with ants. And ants, if you have had a little bit of experience, maybe direct experience, if the swarms can be very aggressive, and also many of them have very, they have a lot of formic acid, which is pretty irritant, so you don't sometimes want to be stung or bitten by them. And they're very aggressive, so they actually can deter a lot of herbivory. So animals that are going to be eating plants, they are deterred by the ants. So there are some plants that they have this really interesting associations with ants as an anti-predatory behavior. And very few animals will go to those plants. But then there's this bird that nests in the middle of one of the most, in a tree that it harbors one of the most aggressive species of ant. And they don't eat it, but again, that's one of those mysteries. How is that it happened? How is that behavior or that relationship evolved? So we learn a little bit of those species, but there's plenty to learn still. There's so many things to learn. This is another of my great favorite species. This is a black spotted bear eye, and this is on the antbird group. So it's an Thamnophilidae. And this particular bird, remember I was telling you about the ants, the army ants, they go in huge swarms. You should look it up about army ant followers. Army ants first. They have an incredible natural history. Like there's life cycle, they go from a stationary time to then a migratory, and then they do these big raids. And when they're doing raids, as I was telling you, they scare everything. Everything that it moves can be attacked by these ants. And there are some few fortunates that they escape the ants, but just for little seconds, because then the birds will take advantage of that. And in the case of army ant followers that are obligate, they cannot survive if they're not associated to the ants. So they will not find food if they're not following the ants. So these birds, they monitor a few different groups of ants, and they're relying on the kind of food that they're going to get with them. And it used to be, we thought for a long time the army ants were only in primary and continuous forests, but we have found them in secondary habitats, in like small patches, and then we're finding these birds in those patches too. So really, again, interesting thing. And these birds go mostly in the understory. They go in the ground. They're just like in those kind of levels in the forest. I think I already mentioned a little bit about this, guys. This is the Pygmy Kingfisher, the smaller of the 5 species of kingfishers that we can find in the area. And you find them in the forest, which was fascinating for me to find them in the rainy season, in the middle of the forest. Where did they go to during the dry season? We still don't know. And we're banding birds, and we don't have that much return of the bands, which indicates that we still have a lot of work to do. So we're not doing a lot of recaptures. And also another possibility is that the birds are moving in other places that we're still not detecting. So that's some other reason that we want to do work with more people who now are also studying birds. So we think that they may have small hunting territories, but seasonal. And we have had a big, so far we have, I don't know, like we have 20 or more of these individuals banded in our area. So this is just an example of the kind of things that we found. And we also are trying not only to assess, obviously, a species richness, to know the numbers and what birds are in there and the natural history, but also trying to see what's the composition of the community. So in these areas, which are mostly mosaico habitats, we're finding like a really good suite of different types of birds based on their feeding habits. So most of the birds that we found are insectivores, and we have some of those. This is a jacamar, and my brain is like now fried. I cannot even. This is the bluish fronted jacamar. Yes. And then we have seed eaters. We have tinamous represented in here. Lots of frugivores, like this is a troupial, and we have a lot of tanagers in the area. Tons, well, not tons, actually, that's not a true statement. Several species of hummingbirds, nectarivores, and also included within nectarivores, which we haven't trapped enough because they're much higher in the canopy. We have a lot of honey creepers that they also feed on nectar. We have some carnivores, some species of carnivores. This is actually a gray hawk that is nesting within the area that we work, very close to actually our campsites. And we have just another number of omnivores, scavengers in general. This is a crow-crested araceli, a really cool bird to see. And Tamaulipas is one of the places that you pretty much almost reliably you're going to see this bird. It's really, really cool. And still, this is just a sample of, a few seasons of working on this, and we continue increasing the numbers. So this is just, I can share this later, it's a lot of words to see, but you can see some examples for all those different guilds. And that's one of the interesting things when it comes to doing any ecological work, is that, you can go to places that have a high number of species, but if you don't have a good distribution of all the different guilds, of all the different types of birds that are feeding into an ecological role, then you not necessarily have a functional community. So it's interesting to see the different kinds of guilds that we're seeing in this habitat that at first we thought that they were mostly, poor habitat, that they were not offering enough for several species of birds. Actually, we have a lot of those niches, and that's pretty interesting to see in these places. So, another thing on this area where we're working is that there's a lot of actually small farms and small crops, and the way that the owners of this land are doing is that they actually mix forests with some small scale crops. And if you have heard anything about bird-friendly coffee, this is what we're trying to learn now with bird-friendly cacao and bananas. There's a huge, like now, availability of chocolate, cacao in many places, and it's a big boom and all. But you don't know that in many places that's kind of an incentive for a lot of farmers to grow cacao, but not with forest management. They take forests, and then they open the forest and plant hectares and hectares, or acres and acres of just cacao. And with the same problem of sun-grown coffee, which decreases the diversity, right? So one of the things that we're doing with this family that we work with, and I'll tell you a little bit about this partnership, is that they grow cacao on a very small scale, and they are growing it under the forest with a lot of mixed habitat. And we're trying to look at the diversity of birds in those habitats compared to even like the neighbors that they have just cacao as a monoculture. And we're trying to do that, so hopefully you're going to hear a little more in the future. So far, in just 10 hectares of mixed forest, we have found 43 species within the agroforestry plots, and all of this is done on a small scale, just for small consumption. It provides another opportunity for them to get a little money, but mostly is for sustain, and also to provide to the people who uses our center. So this is the family Herrera, who are the main supporters of our activities, and they help a lot with providing the land to work with. So this is one of the activities that we're doing, is like looking again at this area. So this is land owned by a family in there, and then their activities are very small scale, pretty conscious with like use of the forest. And then we're trying to see if we can find anything that shows that doing differently will make a difference for the bird community. So far we don't have a lot of data to share, but that's kind of the project that we have started so far. And then the thing is that this helps them to provide some opportunities to learn about how to make chocolate, provides people that visit the place, and they can learn how to do production, they can learn about the birds, the wildlife, they can try it, about everything on a small scale, and it's actually pretty cool. And this is the species of cuckoo that we're trying to trap, and we haven't yet. It's very elusive, and we find it in the borders of the cacao plots, and we haven't trapped it yet. But it's there, we've seen it, we have pictures, we have recordings, but we haven't banned it yet. So the other thing that is pretty important is that within all these activities that we're doing we're constantly training students. So we do a lot of programs that are for training people, especially students, local students. We provide opportunities for anyone. Actually, Stephen was mentioning about the last field trip. If you want to take a field trip to Peru, talk with me. We're actually doing a program this year, and that helps us to collect data for the project, but at the same time also support the students in the training in there. We have also for like now at least 8 years that we're trying to promote more women in science and trying to provide more scholarships for young women from Peru to get into more science activities and especially more bird activities, and getting them from the process of being trainees to actually being trainers. So you'll see a little bit of that. In the process of doing all this, we also have a team who's working with education, using the forest for kids to come and visit. We partner with Miami University of Ohio that we run a program with them The majority of these participants in this program are science or science educators, and then we have the science and programs that are going to be impacting in the local schools. And we partner with a network of educators that are being started in Peru to also lead programs for local kids. And for that, we created the Bosque Escuela, the forest school, to increase more opportunities for local kids to learn in the forest and different things. They can learn from simple things as measurements, like measuring trees as they grow and monitoring vegetation, learning all about things like textures and colors and seed sizes and all in the forest, and then just using a lot of the techniques for identifying biodiversity and just learn in the forest, all those different activities. So we are continuing this project, and this is something we started in 2010. And obviously, birding is one of the big deals, and trying to get them engaged in activities that had to do with bird identification. We got a lot of programs. The pandemic time has been really bad for us because we couldn't take a lot of people there. But we've been doing it for several years, small groups of children that we invite from the community. And all of these activities we provided for free for the school kids. I mean, that we're supported by people who participate on our projects or not. The big story of this is that early on, when we started the program, it was oriented to give opportunities for young people in Madre de Dios to get trained, to get opportunities to do things associated to ecotourism and use birds as the topic for that, and then being trained in doing education and sustainable living. So this is one of the first groups of students that I work with, and then a couple of students from this year, they actually were dating at the time. They were just fresh students. They had gotten married, and they actually are part of the family Herrera, and that's how we partner with a family. And these students learn a lot of things with us in the operation, and now have their own lodge that we have gotten it as a kind of a partnership between Hacienda Herrera and SECOD. And we can do a lot of our activities in the center for tourism and science and education. And they also run the place as an Airbnb and lodge for activities with the same philosophy that we started with, like low impact research and education. So now we have a new center. Originally we were using the family house, but now we have a little bit more, and we've been able to have a much more set place, and it's really, really cool. So this is Rude here. Oh, sorry. So here we have Ruth and Kenny when they were very young, and they were volunteers who coming and being trained at the station. Now they're a family with a little kid, and they run the center. They are the owners, and now they fully work in this activity, and they also are training others. And this is one of the most satisfying things. Ruth is a guide, but also is learn a lot about the training on the birds and the research, and she runs a lot of the programs. And their students, so this is Cristobal, who was trained, and now he's also training other people in the different techniques that we do. So now they're not only managing, but also training more people and just doing it independently. There's more activities now that they're associated to the center and the hacienda. There are programs that they can run by themselves, a lot of ecotourism that it has to do with bird observation or wildlife observation. Some of those things near us, which is at the Tambopata Reserve, which is a national protected area, very popular among tourists, and other things within our center, like it's a little bit hard to see here, but this is here you can see it's a little mammal at night. This is a olingo, which is kind of a really not common mammal to see, nocturnal. If you know what a kinkajou is, anybody familiar with that? It's very, it's very similar to that. And then we also partner with native communities. The SNH communities are the original ancestral people who live in those areas, and for years we've been having their participation in the programs, and they teach us about crafts, about their culture, and we participate a lot with them. And then finally, we are using the center as a kind of a mixed-use place for not only training and doing research, but also for attracting people to here. It's a great place for wildlife in the area, so if you can see, this is a bat falcon that it perches just above us in the entrance of the site. This is taken by a student who took one of the courses in there. And then this is a porcupine that comes every night to the house, and we can see that all the time. And then we also are doing a camera trap research, or at least monitoring, and we have jaguars and pumas in this case. And if you heard about, my brain is fried, what's going on with me? Is the small dark cat, jaguarundi. We have jaguarundis with babies. We have 3 babies in there, and it's just all this new information that we never expected that we're going to find so close to town in habitats that are mixed, that there's not pristine forest. More people are finding us, and we obviously now we do a lot of eBird, and we're kind of like one of the hot spots for birds too in the area, and we got to people and visitors contribute to adding to the place as the Centro de Educación, Ciencia y Conservación. And then we also grow a lot of the food. I mean, I couldn't say we, actually the family grows a lot of the food that we use in the center. We do a no beef. Well, you may be wondering, or maybe somebody want to ask why. I'll finish this and we can discuss about it. But we actually do no beef or soy. Or very little with soy sometimes, I have to say. And a lot of this food is produced on the site. A lot of fruits from the forest are coming here. We have lots of plantains and bananas, so a lot of the things are from the local activities, or sometimes come from the local market. We are 20 minutes away from the main city. So this is the family and some of the volunteers and some of the people who work with us whenever we need seasonal help. And we have grown from a very small group to a family. And then more people can get involved. So if you're interested, you can volunteer in our programs. You can take any other training programs. We're offering them again. Actually, we're going to have one this July, starting July 2nd to the 10th. And then you can also support our work if you want to learn a little bit more about us, SECOT Peru organization. And this year we have 2 programs, one in Birds of the Amazon. It's research and research training and bird watching, and also doing a little bit of photography. And then there's a reports from the Amazon course that is for doing photojournalism, all based in research and conservation challenges, mostly all those stories that I was telling you about, the issues in Madre de Dios. So, with that, I want to thank everybody of you being here today, and also all the people that make possible our work in Madre de Dios. So, thank you very much.
So we definitely would like to take some questions, and I'd like to thank you, Ursula, for coming up. Appreciate that so much. So I get the first question. So you mentioned that you do see some migrants that we might be familiar with in North America, and so maybe could you describe maybe some of the migrants that you find there?
Yeah. So we have Garlic Swanson's thrush. We get that. Sometimes we get broadwing hawks. And let's see, another North American, somehow shorebirds. So we've got greater yellow legs, spotted sandpipers. Let's see, another North American, some of the warblers. And then we have a lot of migrants from southern South America, which are the austral migrants. So that's some other species. And then one of the things that we're trying to do now is that trying to actually focus on one or two species of the North American migrants and trying to see if we can work on a project monitoring those populations. But for that, we want to partner with people here that they can help us with that work. Any other question? Yes.
How do you catch a rufous hermit?
How do you get, we use mist nets. So, everybody familiar with mist nets here? Yeah, so we set up this, we set up the mist nets and we need to use very fine mesh and very thin. The diameter of both the filament and the mesh size is very small. Because on the standard of them, some of the birds just go through. So, and like there's different sizes for capturing different birds. So that's just one of the things for the smaller ones. Yeah, they're tiny. They're really tiny. Yes, Andrew.
Do you know what percentage of birds that you recapture that have been banned?
Yeah, so, sorry. Yeah, so we do, normally we get a lot of the band-tail mannequins now. So that's been one of the things that we have recaptured a lot. And birds too, so there's not but many others that we haven't recaptured yet. So that we're just giving us a sense that even they may have bigger territories, we haven't had, we're not sampling enough. So not that many, wood creepers, we do. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
most of them are resident birds?
Yes, resident birds, yeah. Yes.
Yeah, do you do any radio tagging of birds?
We wish. We are not doing anything yet for that. Well, that's one of the things that we're a very low budget organization. We rely mostly on donations and a few of our programs. And unfortunately, doing radio tagging is a very expensive one, but it's in our plans. So we want to be able to do that so that we can monitor a few more migratory species and other of the patterns of movements. Yeah. Yes.
So, how much cooperation or pushback do you get from local politicians, business community?
Okay, so actually I haven't been able to talk a lot about that because it's a little bit of a sensitive issue, but right now one of the things that is happening is there's a lot of illegal mining, right? But also illegal logging. So how many of you know ironwood?
Well,
Okay, beautiful wood, right? And one of the species comes from Peru and from the Amazon, which is Chihuahuaco, is the local name. And this is one of the most valuable tree species in the market, but it's one of the most valuable species for the forest. It takes hundreds of years to grow to the height, and actually it's one of the favorites, I wouldn't say favorite, but it's one of the choices of harpy eagles for nesting. So a lot of illegal loggers are cutting the forest for that wood and many others that also have high value. So unfortunately, one of the things that happens is that we're having a problem not only in Peru, but in a lot of places where people are fighting for protecting land and then being killed. And there's a whole set of, it's a mafia and among the government and illegal loggers, and that's a really, really big problem. And it actually encompasses everybody, right? From people who sell the wood, from the people who cut the wood, to the people who buys the wood, and to even any of us who will buy a table, beautiful table for your house, right? So the whole incorporating the economy in this is another complex issue. And I'm happy to share more information. There's a lot to talk about the problem. So there are a lot of politicians that unfortunately are within these mafias, and that is a big problem. And the justice system, the laws are there. There's a lot of things, but it's not necessarily working. So it's a complex issue. There's organization that, the good thing though is that there are more people now working for that, and also more people supporting also conservation leaders and especially community leaders. There's a lot of people from indigenous communities that, as it has happened and happening still here, they don't have a voice. And they're the ones who are the most affected by the problem. So it's really complex, but yeah, it's a very problematic issue. I know friends who are being threatened. I know people who have been killed. We are not in a big profile organization, but people that are working in the area much, consistently and dealing with the constant, problems, they are threatened. So it's a problem. And it's happening everywhere. Conservation leaders have been killed for trying to protect the environment. Yeah.
I have a species-specific question. So the
Yeah.
Pygmy Kingfisher, usually kingfishers, the females are more colorful than the males. Is that true in the South American species?
Well, for some of them they are. So the belted is very similar to the ring.
Okay.
It's almost about the same size, and the sexual dimorphism is very similar to what we find in between those two species. It's almost about the same size. For the pygmy, it's not as obvious.
Okay.
They're very similar, and then also the sizes are very similar. So that's something that, we want to we haven't done. The other thing is that it happens that certain species, we don't know the entire set of colorations or mold patterns, and then we may be getting, different ages. We haven't done any genetics to actually confirm if they're males or females at certain points, so that would be something else to do.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Children really love nature, they love beauty, they love animals like this, and so what you're doing with the children in Peru is wonderful, so thank you for that.
Yeah.
To what extent have you thought about, or are there connections between young people there and young people here, in the sense that, like you mentioned, this human rights and nature rights are obviously interconnected, and if people are being killed, profits are going also north. So, to what extent do you see this as a challenge for education that links up you around issues of well-being of the planet, which comes down to human rights?
Yeah, so that's a very important question when it comes to, a lot of people get into activities that maybe not necessarily the ones that we like, and not necessarily the things that they seem legal. But as I mentioned before, they have no alternatives, and that's one of the issues. Right? So sometimes we get in the center kids who are the kids of gold miners, who are the kids of people who are working with logging. And we need to be very careful about, we cannot be judgmental, we cannot be accusatory, but we have to bring conversations, and sometimes the conversations actually come from them, right? And the good thing though is that finally in Peru, because it didn't happen like 10 or 15 years ago. It was just a small group of people working with conservation issues and doing all their best. But it was not that integrated in curriculums, it was not that integrated in the activities. Madre de Dios in particular has had a lot of inflow of people who want to work in those issues. And education, there's networks of educators, there are small people doing environmental activities. Now it's common to talk about the conservation of the environment. In cities, people are using birds. Now we're like a lot of groups working connected and sometimes a little bit independent and doing urban birds. So you get more people connected, and that start little by little changing the minds. Sometimes the kids bring the message to their parents. We don't need to say anything. The conversations are in there. And then they go to their parents, and sometimes the kids become with their parents. And their parents will say, oh yeah, this is what my kid was talking about. Right? So we try to provide information, but you have to be very careful about how the message is delivered. And I guess many of you have learned that when you try to impose anything, it's not going to have a good outcome. You have to give the opportunities for people to learn, but also to talk and to understand and judge it by themselves. And that's also another part of we don't, I mean, I grew up in the city, I didn't grow up in the same place. And that was why it's very important for me to not come with like, oh wait, I have, you know, I studied this, I'm the person who's going to tell you what to do. I could provide the guidance, but now people who are managing the center, some of them come from families who extracted gold and who extracted wood, right? And then by themselves, they have learned, they make their choices, and they can actually make decisions that are going to be for a better future for the kids, right? And so you have to be very careful about how you deliver the message and how you provide the opportunities, but you don't bring all the solutions. We can't. Every place is different. Even I'm Peruvian, coming from a city to a place like that, I cannot come with my ideas. It's just one more thing, right? Yeah.
Just to bounce off of what you said, though, that there are lots of environmental education programs here in North America. I've worked at several, and we have some local ones. And I'm just wondering, I think what you were saying was, have you tried to reach out to the North American programs and do some cross-pollination?
Yes. Sorry, I didn't address that part of the question. Thank you for bringing that up. Actually, yes. And it's so important to connect people to, right? Because in the same way that I'm trying to give you a little bit of information about gold mining in Peru that you didn't know, kids and young people talk about things. So I'm an educator at the University of Washington, and I do teach classes in which I use these topics, and I connect my students with the students in Peru, and they can learn about the issues directly. So I'm in programs that actually are connecting college students, but also through the Miami University of Ohio, many of the students are master's students who are coming from different parts of the US. They actually work in different programs, and sometimes they want to connect their classes, their high school or their primary school courses with people over there. And that's the way that we do it. But we let them, talk, and with no judgment again, we're not just like, well, why are you destroying the rainforest? When people come with that accusatory, it's like, well, they don't have options in so many cases, why are you buying gold? So obviously we don't do that, but in those discussions, we talk it at the level of discussions in class with adults. But that's the approach is that we all want a better world, but we come from completely different situations, so we have to account for all those differences and see how do we bring opportunities for everybody, including the opportunity to speak up and then also, do the things that they need to do.
Can you ask Drew if he's got questions from the audience?
Oh yeah, Drew, do you have any questions from the audience? I don't know, maybe. Yeah, go for it.
Is this area pretty dependent on ecotourism, and how did the last 2 or 3 years with lockdown?
Yeah, actually it is, and it has suffered a lot. There's many companies, especially a small community-based, like ours, and I talk about it's a partnership. Ruth and Kenny, they were closed for a year and a half with zero activity, zero. And then since probably in the past 10 years, there's been a few more family operations that were closed. And I have a friend who runs a butterfly garden. It's not open yet. So bigger companies have had a better luck. There's been some support from the government. They're trying to reactivate. That's the word that has been in the mouth of many people. Reactivation is slowly happening, but it was hit very badly. At some point, COVID was really prevalent in the city, and that was before the vaccines. Fortunately, now everybody has also taken. That's another thing, that fortunately vaccines haven't been such a big deal so far. So people know the importance that then they can do that, and then they can put that in their protocols to accept people to come to. But it's been really hard for them.
Any other questions?
Yeah.
Can I say?
Oh, of course.
Well, I wish you would have had some sounds. Well, I'm not sure what sound the mannequin makes, but I was in Ecuador and we were banding I think club wing mannequins.
Yes, they're made.
Oh, but the sounds are unbelievable, and I'm not sure if they make a
You know,
similar
the
sound.
thing is, I wish I would have, I was not sure sometimes that the sounds fail or the videos
Right,
fail.
but that's
And sometimes we struggle trying to make it work, so purposely I
That's all
don't do it. But if you check, we have a Facebook page, so look for SECOD. There are videos there, and we're going to start putting more in there. And actually, we should put more videos with sounds on the species. So, yeah, thanks for bringing that up. But yeah, I will try to share that with you. And if I haven't answered some of the questions, because sometimes I get excited and I can go in one direction, just let me know. And you can contact me too. Yeah?
You grow shake or coffee there?
No, actually, you know, coffee, some people have been trying to grow coffee in that region, and they try, coffee is from a little bit higher elevation. Here we're at 300 meters above sea level. It's too low for coffee. So, but they have grown it, but it doesn't grow in the, you know, the productivity. Chocolate, plantains, and other fruits. There are plenty of other Amazonian fruits, palm fruits, aguaje, that's the palm that I was talking about, the palm swan. That's another of the resources that they extract. They make juices, ice cream, the kind of fruit that is in that place is fantastic. And many more things that you don't see in the market in other cities. Yeah, but for coffee it's too low.
Any other questions?
All right, well, thank you so much.
So thank you, and again, if you want to talk to Ursula in person, you know, if you have something else you want to talk about, please come up. I just want to put in one more plug for her training that she's doing in July. You can talk to her about it. There's also more information, I think, if you look under this event, I included a link to the training if you are interested in that. So it's really a fascinating opportunity. I was in Ecuador a couple of years ago for 3 weeks, doing in a similar type of training situation and a monitoring situation, and it was a fascinating experience. So you might take advantage of that. So again, thank you so much, Ursula, and thanks everybody for coming tonight, and we'll see you in the fall.